The fluorescent lights of the small-town courtroom buzzed faintly overhead as Zara Lewis sat at the defense table, her shoulders square, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was only 17, but the calm steadiness in her eyes made her appear older. Her mother, a high-powered attorney in D.C., had taught her from a young age how to carry herself with grace and composure, especially in situations where people expected her to break. Zara wasn't a criminal. She was an honor student, student body vice president, and a recent participant in a peaceful protest about policing in schools. It was that protest that landed her in court today, charged with disorderly conduct after allegedly disturbing the peace during the event. In truth, she had simply led a chant for accountability. But in this small southern town, standing up could get you silenced. The courtroom was sparsely filled. A few bored spectators, a couple of reporters, and Officer Brad Milton, the cop who had arrested her. Milton was a thick-necked man in his 40s with a history of aggressive behavior that the department always found a way to excuse. He stood by the courtroom door, arms crossed, glaring at Zara like she was the problem with America. Judge Roberts, an aging man with deep lines etched across his face, presided from the bench. He barely glanced at Zara. He was known for siding with police officers, often dismissing excessive force claims without a second thought. The room carried the stale scent of routine and justice. Zara's public defender, overworked and underprepared, fumbled through a few notes. The hearing was brief and uneventful until the judge called for a short recess. As Zara stood up to stretch, she muttered under her breath, "Of course." Always the same story. Though it wasn't loud, Officer Milton heard it. His eyes narrowed. He stormed toward her like a bull seeing red. "What did you say to me?" he growled, stepping far too close. Zara took a step back instinctively, holding up her hands. "I wasn't talking to you," she said calmly, but Milton didn't care. With no warning, no hesitation, he slapped her across the face, hard. The sound cracked across the courtroom like a gunshot. Zara stumbled back into the table, one hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. For a second, the entire room went dead silent. Then gasps erupted. A woman in the gallery screamed. A young man pulled out his phone and began recording. Zara stood back up, her cheek flushed and swelling, but her spine straight. Judge Roberts looked stunned. The bailiff stood frozen. No one moved. No one tried to stop Milton. He pointed at Zara, voice raised. She was being disrespectful. Zara didn't flinch. She stared him in the eye and said, "You just hit a child in front of everyone." The courtroom was in chaos now, whispers and outrage simmering in the air. Milton, realizing what he'd done, looked around and saw the phones, the cameras, the witnesses. Outside the courthouse, word began to spread like wildfire. But inside, Zara sat back down silently, her face burning not just from the slap, but from knowing this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. What no one in that room knew, not the judge, not Milton, not the audience, was that Zara's mother was just minutes away from walking through the courthouse doors. And everything was about to change. For a moment after the slap, the courtroom sat in stunned paralysis. It was as if time had cracked in two, before the strike and after. Officer Brad Milton stood rigid, his palms still hovering in the air, as if he hadn't fully processed what he'd just done. Zara Lewis, still seated, refused to look away from him. One side of her face throbbed with pain, but her expression didn't twist into fear or tears. Instead, her gaze was sharp, unwavering, almost defiant. The judge blinked, his mouth slightly open. He hadn't moved. Neither had the bailiff, who stood to the side like a forgotten fixture in the room. The silence was deafening, except for the hurried tapping of someone's phone. A college student in the back row had caught the entire incident on camera. Several others began pulling out their phones too, whispering in disbelief. "Did that just happen?" Someone muttered aloud. "She's just a kid," came another voice. "That cop's done for." Officer Milton quickly tried to regain control. He pointed toward Zara again and barked, "She was being belligerent." You all saw it, but his voice lacked conviction now. The slap wasn't a reaction. It was an assault, and there were witnesses. The judge finally found his voice and pounded his gavel. "Clear the courtroom. Recess. Now." The bailiff moved. Slowly, like he was unsure which side to be on. Milton, clearly rattled, avoided eye contact as people reluctantly began to file out. But they weren't leaving in silence. Anger buzzed in the air. Phones were still recording. One older black woman near the back shouted, "That girl better have someone on her side." Zara's defender rushed to her side, whispering something. Unintelligible, but she barely heard it. Her heart was pounding. Her ears were ringing, not just from the slap, but from the sheer violation of it, how quickly things had spiraled out of control, how easily her dignity had been dismissed. Outside the courtroom, the news was spreading like a brush fire. The young man who had recorded the slap was already posting it online with the caption, "Cop slaps black teenage girl in courtroom. No one intervenes." Within minutes, the video had over 1,000 shares, protesters who had gathered in small numbers. Earlier that morning began calling their friends. More students arrived. Signs were made hastily. Chants started. "Justice for Zara" rang out in front of the courthouse steps. Back inside, Zara was led to a holding room for her safety. Her defender promised to call someone, but he didn't need to. Unknown to anyone in the room, Zara's mother, Danielle Lewis, had just arrived at the courthouse. She had flown in quietly from Washington, D.C. that morning, planning to surprise her daughter by showing up to support her in court. The last text she'd sent Zara had read, "I'll be close by. Just breathe. I've got you." As she stepped into the courthouse lobby, a low murmur spread. Someone recognized her. A court clerk's eyes widened. "Is that Danielle Lewis? From the DOJ?" She paused briefly, hearing the raised voices ahead, sensing that something was wrong. Her expression turned steel cold as she moved with swift purpose toward the courtroom. 5 minutes had passed since the slap. And now Justice was about to walk in, wearing heels and carrying a badge that could shake the entire system. The heavy glass doors of the courthouse creaked open as Danielle Lewis stepped inside, her presence commanding immediate attention. Dressed in a tailored navy suit and heels that echoed across the marble floor, she didn't need to announce who she was. Her confidence and precision did it for her. But anyone familiar with law enforcement or civil rights advocacy knew her name. Danielle Lewis, senior attorney at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. And now, the mother of the girl everyone was whispering about, Danielle's. Eyes swept the lobby, quickly assessing the chaos. A court clerk murmured her name and froze. 2 deputies exchanged nervous glances. Outside the building, protesters were beginning to swell. Inside, tension crackled through the air like static. She moved with controlled urgency toward the courtroom doors. As she neared, the muffled sounds of arguing voices became clearer. She opened the doors without hesitation and stepped into the storm. All heads turned. There was Zara, seated at a bench near the front, flanked by a visibly shaken public defender and a female bailiff who had finally stepped in. Her cheek was swollen, red, unmistakably bruised. And though her back was straight, her eyes flickered the moment they met her mother's, a mix of relief and something deeper, like strength, finally finding its anchor. Danielle's expression hardened as she absorbed the scene. She walked directly to her daughter, kneeling to Zara's level without a word. Her hand gently brushed Zara's cheek, her gaze filled with something fiery and maternal. Then she stood and turned. "Who put their hands on my child?" Her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Measured but lethal. Officer Brad Milton, standing stiffly near the wall, straightened as if preparing to defend himself. She was being disrespectful, disruptive. I was trying to maintain order." Danielle stared at him for one long, cold second. Then, with the grace of a seasoned federal litigator, she reached into her blazer and pulled out her DOJ credentials, flipping them open for all to see. "My name is Danielle Lewis. I'm a senior attorney with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice," she said. "And you've just made a career-ending mistake." The courtroom erupted into a low murmur. The judge looked pale. The bailiff backed away slightly. Officer Milton's face drained of color. "I want the video footage secured immediately," Danielle continued, her tone brooking no refusal. "Body cams, security cams, witness testimony, transcripts, everything." She turned toward Judge Roberts. "And I'm formally notifying this court that my daughter's constitutional rights have been violated. I will be filing federal charges against Officer Milton and a civil lawsuit against this department." The judge, clearly rattled, tried to interrupt. "Ms. Lewis, perhaps we can all take a moment to—" "No, we won't take a moment. This moment already happened, and I'm here now." Danielle returned to Zara's side, wrapping a protective arm around her. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. No longer was Zara just a scared teen in court. She was now the daughter of the very system the town had underestimated, a system that was about to come down hard on anyone who thought they could silence her. And as Danielle guided her daughter out of the courtroom, cameras outside waited. The storm had arrived, and it had a name. The moment Danielle Lewis stepped back into the courtroom after tending to her daughter, she wasn't just a mother. She was a force of law, a federal authority with the weight of the Department of Justice behind her. The power in the room had shifted. No one dared move without watching her. Officer Brad Milton, now visibly sweating, leaned against the wall trying to keep his composure, but his shoulders betrayed the panic creeping into his gut. Danielle calmly addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I am requesting an emergency continuation of this case pending an internal review of what occurred in this courtroom. I'm also issuing a formal demand to preserve all evidence related to the assault on my daughter, including video, transcripts, witness lists, and any police communications from the last 24 hours. Judge Roberts cleared his throat, fumbling for authority he no longer fully possessed. "Ms. Lewis, while I understand your concerns, I would advise against escalating matters before internal reviews." "I'm not asking," Danielle replied. "This is now a federal matter. The Department of Justice will be opening a formal investigation into the conduct of Officer Milton and, depending on further findings, your courtroom procedures as well." The judge fell silent. Officer Milton finally tried to defend himself. "That girl was being disrespectful. She was resisting. She was 17, Danielle cut in sharply. "Unarmed, composed, in a courtroom where your job was to ensure her safety. You hit a minor, on camera, in a court of law. And now? You're lying to cover it." The entire courtroom was listening now. Clerks, deputies, even the stenographer. Word had already reached the hallway. A junior attorney peeked in. Outside, protesters were now chanting loudly, their voices vibrating through the walls. "Protect black girls! Fire the cop!" Danielle turned to the bailiff. "I need the names of everyone who was present during the incident. If there's any interference with this request, you will be listed in obstruction reports." Even those usually in power, court staff, law enforcement, began distancing themselves from Officer Milton. He was no longer one of them. he was a liability. The judge, sensing the winds had changed, finally caved. Court is adjourned. Until further notice, he said hastily, banging the gavel. Danielle didn't even flinch. She turned to the public defender, whispered something, and escorted Zara calmly out of the courtroom and into a waiting room where DOJ staff, already alerted, would meet them shortly. Her daughter held tightly to her hand, not saying much, but her silence wasn't fear. It was awe. For the first time since the slap, Zara felt truly safe. Meanwhile, the mayor, alerted by a flurry of viral videos and panicked calls from the courthouse, convened an emergency meeting with city officials. Local reporters descended on the courthouse lawn. Interviews began. Protesters refused to leave. Within the hour, Danielle's press team issued a public statement. The Department of Justice is aware of the incident involving the assault of a minor in a courtroom in Franklin County. We are investigating immediately. There will be accountability. The tables had turned. Officer Milton had slapped a teenager thinking he was above consequences. But in just 5 minutes, he had awakened the full weight of federal power. And justice was no longer a distant hope. It was in the building. By sunrise the next morning, the story had exploded. Footage of Officer Brad Milton slapping 17-year-old Zara Lewis in open court was plastered across every major news outlet. The original video, posted by a college student sitting in the courtroom, had racked up over 5 million views overnight. The hashtag Justice for Zara trended globally. Celebrities, activists, and politicians joined the chorus of outrage, demanding answers and accountability. CNN ran a headline, "Cop slaps black teen." In courtroom, Doge mother steps in. MSNBC called it a watershed moment in courtroom accountability. Even conservative outlets couldn't ignore the optics. An unarmed black girl struck in a courtroom on video, and her mother, a top civil rights attorney, storming in. With federal power behind her. At the center of this storm, Danielle Lewis remained calm and focused. In a press conference on the courthouse steps, she stood beside her daughter, her arm wrapped protectively around Zara's shoulders. Flanked by civil rights lawyers and DOJ representatives, she addressed the nation. "What happened in that courtroom is not just about my daughter," she said firmly. "It is about a system that continues to dehumanize black children, especially black girls, with no accountability. My daughter was assaulted in a place that's supposed to represent justice. That failure will not go unanswered." Zara didn't speak at first, but when prompted by reporters, she stepped forward with quiet strength. "I've been taught to believe in justice my whole life," she said. "But yesterday, I learned that justice doesn't always show up on its own. Sometimes it needs to be demanded. And sometimes it walks through the door with your mother." Her words struck a chord. She wasn't just a victim, she was becoming a symbol. The Department of Justice launched a full-scale investigation into the Franklin County court system and police department. Civil rights organizations from across the country sent representatives. To the town, the ACLU issued a formal statement. Black Lives Matter chapters organized vigils and rallies. Protesters camped outside the courthouse, some with signs reading, "Zara is every black girl and accountability now." Officer Milton was placed on immediate administrative leave. His record, once buried, was unearthed by national reporters, revealing a disturbing pattern of excessive force complaints and internal warnings that had been ignored for years. Calls for his arrest mounted. Judge Roberts, too, was under fire. Past rulings came under review, especially those involving young defendants of color. A leaked internal memo showed he had previously dismissed complaints against Officer Milton, further igniting outrage. Meanwhile, Zara and Danielle received thousands of messages from parents, students, and legal professionals offering support. Law schools invited Zara to speak. Civil rights legends reached out to Danielle personally, praising her swift and powerful intervention. In a matter of days, what began as a courtroom assault had become a national reckoning. Conversations erupted about the treatment of black girls in schools, courts, and communities. The image of Zara's bruised face beside her mother's DOJ badge became iconic, not of defeat, but of resilience and resistance. Franklin County was no longer just a dot on the map. It had become the epicenter of a movement, and the world was watching not just for justice, but for change. 6 months later, the town of Franklin County looked very different. The courthouse, once a quiet, overlooked building where justice was routinely delayed or denied, had become a national symbol of accountability. What happened to Zara Lewis had forced open the doors of a deeply flawed system, and now those cracks were being filled with something new: reform, transparency, and reckoning. The Department of Justice concluded its investigation with damning results. Officer Brad Milton was charged with assault, civil rights violations under color of law, and obstruction of justice. In court, the video evidence left no room for doubt. The jury took less than 4 hours to find him guilty. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison without parole, but the fallout didn't stop with him. Judge Roberts, facing both public pressure and internal review, quietly retired before the DOJ report was even released. The investigation revealed his pattern of dismissing complaints against law enforcement, disproportionately harsh sentences for black youth, and a long-standing failure to report police misconduct. His resignation was followed by the immediate appointment of an oversight board that would now monitor courtroom proceedings in Franklin County. The police chief also stepped down, replaced by an interim chief appointed under DOJ guidance. New policies were implemented across the department. Body cameras became mandatory. A citizen review panel was formed, and all officers were required to complete intensive de-escalation and anti-bias training. Danielle Lewis was offered a promotion at the DOJ for her swift action and legal leadership, but she turned it down. Instead, she accepted a temporary assignment overseeing reform implementation in Franklin County. She wanted to stay close to ensure that what happened to her daughter never happened to anyone else again. Zara, in the meantime, found her life transformed. Though she had never asked for the spotlight, she handled it with quiet maturity. She received thousands of college offers and ultimately chose Howard University, where she planned to study political science and pre-law. She gave speeches at rallies and conferences, not out of ego, but out of duty. In one particularly powerful moment, she addressed the United Nations Youth Summit virtually. "I used to think justice was something you waited for," she told the global audience. "Now I know it's something you fight for and something you build." A mural was painted across the courthouse wall, an image of Zara standing tall beside her mother, surrounded by phrases like dignity, justice, and she didn't back down. It became a pilgrimage site for activists, students, and survivors of injustice across the country. The legacy of the incident grew far beyond the courtroom. Law schools studied the case. Documentaries were filmed. Civil rights organizations used it as a model for rapid response legal intervention. It was no longer just about Zara, it was about every young person who had ever been silenced, struck, or ignored. Franklin County, once a place where injustice hid in plain sight, had become a beacon of change. And at its heart stood a girl who refused to stay silent and a mother who turned outrage into action. Justice wasn't just served. It was redefined.